Hi, my name is Saleem Muhammad Curry. My pronouns are he, him. I identify as a black man. I actually prefer being called black rather than African American or Afro American. Maternal and paternal family members are actually both black, but I also, by way of close friendships and chosen family, have family from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic as well. I speak English mostly, or at least AAVE or African American Vernacular English, some English, and as well as Spanish. This is what looking bilingual means to me.
You came into your Latinidad through a way of chosen family, which is beautiful and unique. And so, having that unique perspective, what is Latinidad when we think of Salim?
Okay, good question. So I just to go back just a little bit, as you mentioned, by way of chosen family. And so when I was a bit younger, sometime in high school, I had a best friend and went through. I won't go completely into the story, but I was having some issues with my actual, my non-chosen family, the family that I was born into, and essentially became the situation where I was literally living with my best friend's family, and that is where I went to when I left from college, and it was my home. And they are my family, and even times when people will say, no, 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 that's actually your best friend. Like if they call my brother my best friend, um, then it actually bothers me a bit because it doesn't. For me, he's not my best friend. He's actually my brother. What has shaped the way that I see Latinidad is actually growing up in the culture that I grew up in. So as I said before, I'm black, and I grew up here in America, in New Jersey, and there are just a lot of things that for me feel at home culturally, as a black person, whether it be the way that I say certain things. Even in the intro, I actually talked a little bit about how I'm much more comfortable speaking in AAVE than I am saying that I'm an English speaker, because it just feels different. There is something cultural for me. There is something that feels at home culturally about the way that certain people say things, and when I hear it, it reminds me of home, of a safe place, of a us, and not necessarily versus a them, but definitely a us. And so Latinidad, in a very similar way, there are times in which I do feel at home, um, and when there are things that are, whether it be culturally Puerto Rican, whether it be culturally Dominican, and then sometimes just generally things that are from Latin America.
When we spoke last time, you described it as the same feeling as when an old black song comes on.
Yes.
Can you I don't wanna
Yes, yes,
say
yes,
it.
yes, yes.
Those aren't my words,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they're yours. I
So
just love that image.
yeah, so I am one of the first times that I actually recognized this was one of the first times that I was like hanging out in someone's room, someone's dorm room in college. And a song came on. I can't even tell you what song it was, but the song came on, and it just was, how you hear a song and it's not your song, it's a borrowed song from your parents or from a loved one, but it snuck up on you, and it's now your song in some way. And again, it just felt like home, and it was just like, this is my, I'm not gonna say any bad words, but this is my jam, right? Really, at the end of the day, that that was the first time that I recognized that that was a very similar feeling to what I had with songs that I felt were black songs, songs that made me feel black, songs that made me feel at home in my blackness, and even songs to some degree, speaking about looking bilingue and Latinidad. There are some songs that even when I got to college, that folks who didn't grow up in America, even though they were black, they didn't know the old songs. They didn't have there's something about the history of it, the kind of growing up around it, or the fact that it would be at birthday parties and other things like that. And there are songs, there are Spanish songs, merengue, salsa, and definitely bachata, that represent that for me. Juan Luis Guerra is like
Mm, yeah,
absolutely one of those songs. If one of his songs comes on, it's very like,
classic.
okay, who's playing this? Because me and you just became friends, because clearly we share something that I don't necessarily share with everyone else.
And that's beautiful. I mean, we can go into a whole other conversation on the power of music
Yes.
and how that really. But I feel that when you said that to me, I was like, oh, that is such a perfect image and also feeling that I think a lot of people can connect to. How has your perception of family been influenced by both your PR, DR side and your Black side?
Recognizing the concept of chosen family, and recognizing the concept of sort of this idea of being home in a place that you weren't necessarily born in. I guess the best way that I can put it is I feel very Puerto Rican, and interestingly enough, more Puerto Rican than Dominican at times, but very Puerto Rican, even though I know I'm not Puerto Rican. I'm not from Puerto Rico. My parents are not from Puerto Rico, but there are a lot of moments um, where I feel that. I feel this familiar, it feels very familiar. It feels very at home. Just the idea that you can have a chosen family, and that even if you're going through rough times with the family that you have, and if even if you're not, to be completely honest with you, that there are people that come into your life and they can become what you choose for them to be, and you don't necessarily have to uh, just deal with the cards that you're dealt.
You described your Blackness being affected by your affinity for language and culture. Tell us more about that.
Interestingly enough, and I didn't, of course, I didn't know this when I was younger, and I'm not even sure that I shared this with you in our first conversation, but I actually started learning Spanish in the fifth grade. And so by the time that I got to high school, you know, I had years under my belt of I don't think I was at any kind of impressive fluency at all. Um, but I definitely had a few years under my belt of practicing and knowing some words, maybe not super great at grammar, but definitely at least some vocabulary words. I actually was able to communicate to some degree in Spanish and understand um, when people would communicate with me. And I had family members who sort of took that and used that as a way to question whether I was to question whether I was embracing this language too much, this language that wasn't necessarily one that I was born with, and use that to say that I must not want to be Black. The fact that I'm learning, the fact that I have class and I'm learning, and it's actually part of a grade. That like that was the interesting thing for me,
Yeah.
and usually would be my retort, which is you can't fault me for doing what I'm actually going to school to do. And I didn't feel bad about that. On top of the fact that I personally don't think that knowing Spanish calls into question anything about me. Knowing any language calls into
Yeah.
question anything about me. And for me, especially growing up Black and understanding that, you know, the circumstances that I was in, that my ancestors were in, was in a situation where culturally a lot of what they had was taken from them, and to some degree even the language that I'm speaking right now is not a language that is native to where my you know, a large portion of my ancestry is from. Language was used, my affinity for language, my interest in the language, and um, my ability to practice it, or even my interest in practicing it, was this thing that they saw as this badge of like, oh, your culture is being called into question.
And it's interesting because these were adults, correct?
Yeah.
So and I want to really highlight that. I think what was incredible for me and what really impacted me with that story was that these were adults. How can an adult turn around and say that to a child?
I talk about this a lot because I think it comes up a lot, at least for me, and in situations that being Black, right? There's this understanding of being an elder, right? And
Mm.
a lot of times I have experienced that as a disconnection of responsibility rather than an activation of responsibility. And what you're saying is, here was a responsible person in the room. If either of us we're going to be responsible for the other, for their
Yeah.
well-being, mental or physical, emotionally, psychological, even, it would be the adults, right? And I definitely struggled when I was younger because having your legitimacy called into question by someone who clearly you look to confirm that legitimacy was odd, because I knew what I wasn't. You know what I mean? Like you learn at a young age what you're not, and to have my legitimacy questioned in that way definitely made me feel like I did not have I didn't have an us. If I really started to call into question my Blackness, it's not like I actually had any group to call us, any group to call we. I was always a them, never an us.
Why do you have to choose? And also, why is speaking a language mean that you are that thing? That's
Right.
actually not true.
Right.
There's languages that people speak and they're not a part of that community technically, or they are, but from an educational standpoint. So it's not that that is part of their culture now.
Now here's this language that I'm actually I can kick the training wheels off a bit and ride down the block. I might not get completely far, but I'm actually getting to a place that I'm really proud of. And
So I love this because your ability to speak Spanish, your close connection with your chosen family led you to have a deep understanding not only of the language, but also of the, and I'll generalize here, the Latinx culture, right? I think it gave you that sensibility because you were suddenly in those shoes. So can you share how this was beneficial professionally?
so growing up and learning Spanish, I understood that, and English too, right? We were just talking about this. Pronunciation is very important. And so and I would hear my family members talking about the way, making fun of each other about the way that about the way that they pronounce certain things, or their intonation goes up, or if their voice is really low, and this is how a lot of folks speak. Um, and so I paid very close attention to that. You know, I was in Spanish class with students who were like, "Pásame el libro," and it was just like, I understood that Spanish was not intended to be pronounced like English, and connecting that to legitimacy when I got a little bit older, and especially as I started to have this chosen family, that was a way that even around folks who didn't know me, especially around folks who didn't know me, it was a way to legitimize that I did have this connection to certain things. I mean, that got me through college, basically. So when I got to college, I don't think I spoke better than everyone in the class. I don't think I knew more Spanish than everyone in the class, but my accent to the teachers, it was legitimized in this way that sometimes I felt like they would give me extra credit, or just do these interesting things, just assume that I knew more, because I was able to drop off certain words at the end of certain words, or and Puerto Ricans, and at least my family, pronounces R's as L's a lot of times, because I was able to do that, and then pick up when people were doing that and be able to understand, of course. That helped. And as I moved into my professional career, when there were opportunities to speak Spanish, I did. And so in 2010, I actually started working for Target. The staff that I had the privilege of supervising was pretty much half Spanish speaking and half English speaking. And this was like every opportunity for me to speak Spanish, an opportunity for me to be able to communicate in Spanish. First, a couple of the employees stopped answering me in English. And I thought that was interesting. We're at work. And of course, there's, especially in terms of working at Target, I didn't have enough of the vocabulary of all the things at Target to completely be able to communicate. And so there would be times that I would be lost, and they would stick it out with me. They would essentially like, explain it a different way in Spanish. One of the team members came to me and they explained that they had never had the opportunity to have a supervisor where they didn't have to wonder about the comfort and the language that they were communicating in. And although they spoke English well, there was just something about being able to communicate in Spanish. And that was really positive. It was a really positive experience for them. And it was especially around work, where I'm sure, I guess they don't necessarily get to do it as much. So now, if you put me in the middle of Target, I can tell you what anything in Spanish. I had no idea any of a truck, or to load and unload things, but now I actually know it.
You guys having that exchange where they could help you with your Spanish and kind of help you out with loading and unloading.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you probably helped them with their English.
I imagine that it was like the thing that I talked about earlier, this at home, this familiar thing, and to have someone who you feel like you share so much more than sort of the surface, once you make this sort of side connection of